Welcome. Gio and I are here today with Brian Elliott. I have met Brian in person and we both follow him on LinkedIn. He is kind of famous. You might be one of our more famous guests, I think. One of Forbes's Future of Work 50 speaker and leadership advisor who combines 25 years of leadership experience as a startup CEO and executive at Google and Slack. And now you talk about the future of work, among other things, which we'll let you tell us about. He spent some time in Chicago. We were just chatting about our love for the city and our greater love for the Bay Area weather. Brian's in San Francisco. So, Brian, thanks for joining us. I'm excited about our conversation today.
Glad to be here with you guys, and I'm excited too.
Gio, where are
Let
you?
me clarify. You guys were
Oh,
bragging about being grad
we were.
students in
No,
Chicago, right? So you were just talking about you were
Undergrad.
he
in.
was
It
undergrad.
doesn't matter. It doesn't
He
matter.
does have a
It,
Harvard degree.
you guys
There,
are still brainiacs.
I lived there. I grew up in Southern Illinois, middle of nowhere.
Oh, you
Chicago was a
grew
big
up in
city, man.
Southern Illinois. Oh, that's a fun
Ooh,
fact. Very
ooh.
cool. Okay,
Well, I'm
well,
extra excited about this
I
conversation
know.
because I really don't know anything about Brian other than what I've seen on LinkedIn, and so I'm excited to get to hear from you a little bit more and kind of how you got into the famous space. And I think that the cool part about it is there's not that many of us that have managed to kind of consistently grow our brand when it comes just to this sector, right? And so, just excited for the conversation.
I'm kind of interested in the growing the brand story too, because you're a corporate guy.
Yeah,
You
exactly.
were.
And how do
Yeah,
you make that shift and that change?
exactly. Yeah. Okay,
Awesome.
well, and he has two sons. One of them has a very interesting job. We'll have to talk about that. I'm
Yeah,
sure they're both very interesting. I'm sure the
they are.
lawyer is interesting.
Yeah.
Although, let's see, we should place bets. Does he really want to be a lawyer?
He actually wants to work in public sector on busting bad guys for money laundering.
Oh, wow.
Uh-huh.
Okay, he's on a mission. Okay, I
Oh
like
yeah.
it.
Oh
Okay,
yeah.
that's
Both my
good.
kids are on missions. We'll see how long those missions last.
Okay, I love it. Okay, well, I'll start with the broader questions. Gio will dive in with all sorts of questions that you're maybe prepared, maybe not prepared to answer. Although you probably do a lot of podcasts, huh?
I do a few. I
You
do a
do
few.
a few. Okay. Yeah, I mean, tell us a little bit about your background and how did you become, top 50 in future of work experts or
Yeah, exactly.
thinkers or thought leaders, whatever, however you describe yourself.
Way, way, way back when. I dreamed when I was a kid in Southern Illinois of being a future of work 50. Um,
Wait, what were you going to be when you grew up?
I never really had it figured out, to be honest. Like marine biologist once upon a time, astronaut, like most
Yeah.
kids at some point in time, right?
Yeah.
And just sort of, bounced around from thing to thing, but never really had that same focus. Both my kids do. It's wild. It's really cool to see.
Well,
Um,
now there's the internet, so you can get more focused. We're probably, well, I don't know, maybe loosely in the same, like there was no internet. And I also I grew up in a farm in upstate New York. So yeah, you only knew about the jobs you saw on TV.
exactly,
Yeah.
exactly. And nobody was talking about hybrid work back then either.
No,
That kind of wasn't a thing.
no.
Coworking? What? Huh? Flex? Yeah. So I grew up in the Midwest, went to Northwestern undergrad, jumped out into consulting because it kind of teaches you a lot very fast. So I spent a bunch of years actually with BCG doing consulting around the globe, Chicago, Singapore, San Francisco, and really got tired of it after a while. Like the personal drain is one thing, but also I'm tired of just sort of like doing the presentation and then walking off the job and not really owning a thing and putting my hands on it. So it was the late 90s and
But you left as a partner.
I left as basically that means the junior level of a partner. Like,
Okay, still.
when you're,
Yeah.
lower end, lower end.
Okay.
The golden handcuffs were sort of tin like, sort of like at that early stage of.
Okay, early where you could still, right. Okay,
Yeah,
talk yourself into, we can do this.
exactly.
Okay.
Exactly. And, tech bubble land was actually a great learning experience. I got my butt kicked. I went to a startup and learned I really sucked at managing people. I was really not very good.
What, after being a consultant for a
Oh
bunch of
yeah.
years,
Oh yeah. Oh yeah. Well, look, I hired consultants. Like I
yeah.
ran recruiting for the firm in Chicago, and I was really good at hiring people that operated like me, most of whom also looked like me, right? Type A, hard charging personalities that will work all day and night. And I wasn't very good at managing people from different walks of life with different desires and skills and motivations, but I got good fast because I had to. So startup days were school of hard knocks. And I learned that whole phrase, culture eats strategy for breakfast, was super true.
Mhm.
And it sort of nourished me in a different way, right? Like figuring out what drives and motivates people as opposed to what drives business, and how those two intersect is really powerful if you do it right. So I did that for a number of years. I did startups for about a dozen years. We sold companies a couple of times to private equity, nothing famous, nothing ever died, nothing ever did spectacular. So I went to Google to get that experience at bigger scale. I got hired into a job I could have done a decade earlier at Google. I went from managing a team of 300 to managing 2 people, one of whom quit on day one.
Oh, no. I'm not working for this
Here's
guy.
a start. Exactly. I'm not
Yeah.
working for this guy. Some startup schmo who came from nowhere. So I did that. I worked at Google, ended up running a good sized product and engineering team and a business unit at Google. Did that for about 5 years. And then Google's a very big company. I'm not that great at big companies myself. Jumped out into Slack when they called. And Slack at the time was about 300 employees,
Wow.
growing like a weed. I came in to help the developer platform team build out its product and services and all the rest of it, and had a fantastic adventure for the next 5 years at Slack, riding that sort of growth curve, taking on all kinds of jobs. I was doing a lot of our PR and comms for a variety of different reasons, but basically was pretty good at helping figure out, the narrative of what we were about and what we were doing. And then in 2020, the pandemic started. And a whole mess of us found ourselves in these conversations with our peers at other companies going, how are you handling this? What are you doing? What are you changing? And Slack itself was a office-based company. Most people figure, oh, it's Slack. You guys must have been remote friendly. Not at all. If you wanted to go remote, we basically put you on a performance improvement plan. It was not a remote friendly company by any stretch.
You could Slack each other, but only if you were sitting next to each other.
Yeah, pretty much. And you did. It was,
Yeah.
it was a really quiet office. You had a lot of time.
Yeah. There's a channel for that.
There is a channel. But in 2020, what I did is I went to our CEO, Stuart Butterfield, and with a proposal and a couple of folks that I wanted to tap to help me do this, to build a think tank. And that sort of tapped my own kind of data geek reservoir around research to sort of see what we were learning coming through this pandemic about what was working for people and what wasn't, and were companies changing their policies. And that became this thing called Future Forum. So we spent 3 years, almost 4 years, doing research, talking with executives, working with companies across a whole spectrum of industries on, post-pandemic ways of working, what was working for them, what wasn't, you name it. So my 2 co-founders, Helen, Sheila, and I wrote a book. We ended up, at one point we sort of joked, when I talked them into doing this, or we talked each other into doing this, the bet was, will this job in 2020 that's focused on flexibility last more than 3 months, or will we have to close it down because we're all going to be back in the office?
Yeah, exactly. You're like, we got to do this fast before.
Exactly.
Yeah.
The good news, bad news is fast forward 5 years and we're still arguing about how many days a week in the office is the right number, which is stupid. It's like the dumbest argument. Because a lot of executives and leaders themselves haven't wrapped their heads around, how to actually lead and manage distributed teams, what you need to do to train managers to be good at it, and what it unlocks. And fortunately, about 2/3 of them have figured it out. But there's a sizable group of senior CEOs who are kind of against this. So,
Yep.
we still work that. So I spend my time these days doing a lot of the stuff I did. We shut down Future Forum a year and a half ago. Salesforce bought Slack. All kinds of wild things happened. So I spend my time helping leaders navigate around changes in technology, changes in ways of working, changes in demographics. So flexibility and generative AI are obviously, top of the stack in that, as well as cross demographic, cross-generational changes in terms of what's it going to take for you to be successful in the future, because like using the old adage, what got you here won't get you there. So what are you going to need to do to be successful in the next round of change? So that's me in a very long soliloquy.
No,
What would you say the hardest thing about getting these C-level suite and real estate directors to really see the opportunity is, right? I think some of them see it, and then you said there's still some that are struggling with it. What would you say is the biggest holdup?
I'll give you sort of 3 camps. I think there's the kind of, maybe people like me who, look, I'd managed distributed teams for 2 decades by the time the pandemic hit, right? People working in different cities, but they all showed up in offices. But I still thought the office was the center too, right? And I was still nervous about spinning up a remote team at Slack. But there are people like me that like, oh, wait a minute, it took the experience itself, but now I get it, because now I can actually attract more talented people. And it's not about fully remote. That's not what most people want. Most people want regular time together with their team. You just got to figure out like what the right habits and patterns are. And if you can do that, you get to tap a broader pool of people. They're more likely to stick around, but maybe most importantly, they're a lot more engaged. They'll give their passion to the business because, you're treating them like an adult. So that's like the one group. And that's the easy group, right? There's a group in the middle that still doesn't quite get it, is still wrestling with this, reads the headlines and gets, well, I guess the world is going back to the office, or I guess, remote is unproductive, but I'm not fully convinced. Could you tell me what's going on? And I love those people because the combination of like research plus let's look at your own company. Let's actually spend the time understanding what's working and what's not with your own team, can go a long way. Those are the pragmatists, right? And pragmatists are wonderful because they're open to, what change might be needed.
They're curious.
They're
and
curious.
open. Yeah.
Yeah. And those are the people who I think we can influence and can help bluntly. And then you got people on the other side of this, which is, I don't care. I want what I want, and I want what I want. And to some degree, that's conditioned these days by things like, I'm perfectly fine if some people quit, either because I want to lose talent, or maybe it's because I don't think those are our kind of people. And often what they mean is maybe that's not my kind of people. Like, I want to see the hustle culture. I want to see Johnny showing up early and Johnny stays late. And hustle culture is what we're about. And that's what made me successful. And by God, that's what I want to have back in this firm. And sometimes when you hear the word culture, that's what it means. Culture is not the warm and fuzzy. Culture is the get your nose back on that grindstone. And it's almost always said by a white guy who's my age or older, right? It is what it is.
Who has the privilege to behave that way. Yeah.
Who has a corner office and probably a private jet. And, in some cases, maybe the CEO of more than one company. So, he's probably not spending all this time in the office because people would ask which one. But also, almost every instance, they're not a primary caregiver either, right? Like they don't have the at-home responsibilities either. And so, the conversations I've had the past month and plus, again, because of Andy Jassy and Jamie Dimon and Elon Musk and Donald Trump, is CHRO comes and says, hey, look, my CEO just went to another event and oh my God, he's fired up because we said 3 days a week, 2 years ago, and we're only getting 2. I'm like, yeah, I know. Everybody, when you say 3, you get 2. And he's ticked because he feels like people aren't following through on it. Mm-hmm. And so we'll get down to conversations a couple directions, one of which is, what real business problems are you seeing? And the answer is none that have anything to do with this. We have a competition issue, or we have a pricing issue, or something else like that. When you said 3 and you're measuring 2, how are you measuring it? You're taking out salespeople who are on the road and PTO and all the rest of it. Does your CEO know that your average seat utilization before the pandemic was probably between 50 and 60%? All the stuff that you all and people who are in the space know well. But usually it comes down to, a CEO who wants what he wants. And then the dynamic is entirely dependent on what's the C-suite that sits around that person and what's the trade-offs that they're willing to make or not make around things like engagement and retention of talented people. And the last thing I'll say on that front is there's a little bit of this, like, are you playing the short game or the long game? Because there are, the return to office 5-day-a-week demand is a short game play, right? It's I want what I want. I want people who look like me, and we'll lose some people in the course of it, but maybe I need to shed, some heads anyway. The long problem with that is you lose engagement, right? You lose people's trust in you as a leader and as a business. And if the labor markets shift around again, it might not be as friendly for you the next time around. So we'll see where this all lands, but we're in year 5 of arguing about this.
So as you think about the culture on that side of it, I mean, what's the conversation you have around culture and being remote and all those things? And obviously people fall into different camps, right? Depending on the company, what culture they want and everything else. But I mean, how's that conversation evolving?
I'm actually a big believer that you do need to get teams together on a regular episodic basis. I think it just makes a world of difference in terms of the acceleration of relationships, depth of relationships you have with people, which is as much about breaking bread together as it is about talking about the plan, right? And so what I'll do is I'll pull out research and data, everything from, like, Gartner's got great stuff that shows that people's engagement levels are much better If they're either remote or hybrid, then 5 days a week in the office. 5 days a week in the office is like the worst of all possible worlds. And then there's plenty of firms out there, from like Allstate to Zillow to Atlassian, that have released data and studies through me or through others that say, hey, look, if you get people together on a regular basis, especially people who are on a team that's distributed, you get a big boost in engagement. And you get a bigger boost in engagement out of that than you do out of random chance encounters in the office, because it's people that work together. And it's that sort of nucleus thing that you want to build around. And so doing that, though, is also a big shift. This is where our workplace friends come into play, because, man, their world's shifted dramatically, right? And even in firms that are cranking up the demands, they're not getting any more money. They're getting more pressure, right? They're getting more pressure to do more with less. They're getting, pressure to be facilitators of events, not just facilities people. And it's really hard. And so I think helping them make the business case for, hey, look, let's trade off. In a lot of cases, firms are downsizing office space. Great. Can we please not take all of that to the bottom line? Let's reserve a chunk of that. For redesign, please.
Yeah.
Let's put the effort into creating spaces that are fit for purpose today, as opposed to what we thought was right a decade ago, so that people aren't coming back and going, I don't have enough space to do a quiet call with anybody. I can't work effectively from here, or I can't get meeting rooms. That's one. Second is, put some money in the travel budget, please. If teams are distributed, so you can get them together.
Yeah.
It's just hard. And the third one is small teams of people to help facilitate that work, right? Because most leaders aren't very good at running team offsites or onsites.
Yeah. And
Like-
probably don't want to, and don't
Yeah.
right? That's
Help them out. Help
Yep.
them build their agenda. Help them with, like, there's everything from, like, Dropbox has an offsite planning team where they published out some of what they do for people. It's the sort of self-serve guidelines. It reduced their, like, everybody else in the organization now spends one third less time sweating how to run an on-site program, right? Zillow orchestrates these things with a 6-person team out of Seattle that orchestrated like 500 events last year
Oh,
for a 7,000 person organization.
Yeah.
But, 6 people versus, I guarantee you, they took a lot more out of the real estate than they put back into the 6 people
100%,
plus the
right.
travel.
right. Well,
But
and
your
then the
CFO can't take it all.
experience that people have, right? Because if you create a crappy offsite, then
Yeah.
with not a great experience, or to your point, you downsize the office, and then there's no service, and there's nothing compelling, but it's a mandate. I mean, it's nice to see people, but you don't really like. My husband has a 1 day a week mandate, and it's a fairly new job. And I was like, well, how's the office? And he's like, well, I have to, get in a phone booth to talk to investors. So his role is, like, it's like a lab space. It's just,
Yeah.
kind of a startup, but they just like, nobody's in charge of the office. And it's a weird, so it's very uncomfortable for him to go. He wants to go, he wants to see the team, but I mean, it's
This is what-
hard.
Like, I noticed some workplace leaders also fall across the entire spectrum, right? I know people are like, coffee badging's perfectly fine by me. If somebody comes in and they're in the office for 4 hours and then they commute back home, but they're there for the 4 hours that their team is together, and then they're
Yeah.
going home to do meetings and calls and individual
And
work.
miss rush hour, and
Yeah, exactly. Totally fine. That's what we're here for. And you get other executives who get ticked off at that, right? And it's like, no, but you got to rethink, like, the office isn't really the sole thing any longer, but it does serve a really important purpose. That purpose just inverted. It used to be, we assumed it was the place where everybody did all their solo work.
Yeah.
And there was some meetings that happened. It's like, no. It's the place where you want all the interaction to happen. The solo work can happen wherever you want it to happen, wherever is most productive for you.
Yeah.
Flip it.
Geo's very, I mean, the thing sort of thread I'm hearing, I mean, there's so many, and we love talking about this collectively. We could all talk about this all day long.
Yeah.
But it's like the human sort of personality piece of it, right? There's Geo loves, like, Geo introduced me to the Enneagram. I'm sort of obsessed with the Enneagram, but because everybody's got their own lens. Like, every human is a snowflake, and
Yep.
everybody has their own lens that's impacting how they think about all these things. I mean, it's so much more complicated than just the decision about, it's culture, it's leadership, personality, it's the culture of the leadership team, and
I think, and you're actually touching on something that I think is where a lot of this has kind of come home to roost in terms of like failings of organizations, which is historically have not done a good job of supporting managers to be good managers and good
Yeah.
leaders, right?
Yep.
Usually what happens, the classic path is, well, the guy who was the manager just got promoted or just left the organization. So the senior most person in the team gets promoted to manager. Maybe they get some corporate training program they're thrown into a few months down the road.
Yeah.
But it's like, here, figure it out. You're on your own. And man, things like being able to talk about an Enneagram and compare it across the team. And I'm a 3 with a 4 wing, by the way, professional.
Not surprising that
Yeah,
you
I
two
know.
get along so well.
I am
Not,
also a 3. I don't think my wing's a 4 though. I need to look at my wings.
and like being able to use that sort of tool and compare and contrast personalities across the team, that's like another level.
Yeah.
Like the starting point of just like, how do you conduct good one-on-ones with your team so that people know what are the, so you can every week have a conversation about how did it go last week? What'd you get done out of the list? What are your priorities this week to make sure we're aligned? What can I do to unblock, problems and help you be successful? Like teaching people those rhythms as leaders. How do you manage people for performance as opposed to monitoring their butts in a seat? Like that real, just rudimentary, how do you manage people is often missing in organizations, let alone the like EQ skills you need to help them understand each other, build relationships, convince them to adopt completely different tools like generative AI, which is really a huge trust move. You're not going to get there through command and control, and you're not going to get through if you don't support managers in the first place. And I just think we've sort of failed on that front in most organizations.
So I think Jamie made a good point about, the snowflake and psychology and how people work and just looking at their past. I mean, our childhood is so much a part of who we become, right? Whatever that may be. So what about your upbringing is what has helped you look at things the way you look at today, from your parents or just the environment you grew up in Southern Illinois?
So, a product of a single mom in the 1970s in rural Illinois. I was the only and oldest child. She had a younger brother also that I ended up feeling a fair amount of responsibility for. Let's put it that way. So early on, I learned to be pretty independent, but also took on a lot of responsibility, and so learned a lot of things that way, right? So, and you learn a lot too about what it's like to be different from other people. Even in that kind of modest setting, I was the only our mom being a single mom was the only one in my town that I knew of growing up. So it was definitely not the usual situation.
Yeah.
And so you just learn through those experiences, and it kind of shapes you and it conditions you, and you sort of figure it out and move forward. I also went to undergrad and combined 2 weird things. I was a math geek and I loved musical theater. So I did stage. I couldn't perform certainly not at that level. Northwestern.
You're
has
not going to
that
sing for us.
amazing-
Okay. Yeah.
No. I will do karaoke. Trust me, but not here. But like backstage, so stage management. Being a stage manager was a fantastic job in musical theater. Love it, love it, love it, love it. Feeds my ADHD, which is also a part of me. So like all those formative things that add up, right? So, and then a lot of it was back to that, like how do you combine that sort of understanding of people. And what I learned over time was it's not just the data, it's the storytelling aspects of it, which goes back to the theater part, right? Like, how do you get people to go back to like that pragmatist in the middle? The pragmatist who you give data to will sit there and go, okay, I kind of get it, but what do I do? Right. And so you've also got to give them help. You got to give them, same way you do that manager, tactical ways to rethink the thing that they've done the same way 20 years in a row in a different way. So instead of being dependent on the whiteboard and pulling everybody together to do a brainstorming session, how do you do brainwriting? How do you give your team the prompt, let them think about the idea, have them write down their 3 ideas, and then don't share them until you all come together. Share them on a doc, share them on the board, whatever you want to do. But how do you generate that sort of range of ideas? It's going to be a lot bigger than if you're in front of a whiteboard with a pen. But giving an executive that example, that narrative, preferably maybe a little more drawn out than I just did it, helps them understand that may be a different way of doing something than the way they've fallen into, and help them understand that there may be better ways forward and they don't have to fall back on what they've been doing the same way for 20 years when the world around them has changed.
What does your role look like in 5 years? Like your role in the, the world of the future of work.
So I think a lot of stuff's going to stay the same. A lot of this to me comes down to leadership advice and coaching and helping individual leaders sort of reinvent how they work personally as well as how their teams work. And I draw on research and stories from, other people in other companies in order to do that. And I think that remains largely the same. Technology is going to keep advancing. We can't go a week without some major radical ground shifting, quaking moment with generative AI these days. I hope that in 5 years, we're not debating number of days a week in the office because we've already been doing that for 5 years. We should really
Yeah,
move on.
exactly.
More interesting.
Yep. Okay, good.
But I do think it comes down to, if you look forward, the things that are not going to change are technology acceleration, multiple generations in the workforce, people with different needs. The work that's left for us humans is more complex, it's more creative, it's more interdisciplinary in nature. And so therefore, it's even more dependent on EQ than IQ, right? On helping people be good humans as well as good leaders and bring those two things together. And I sincerely hope that plays out, and I believe it. But it means that you got to keep on sort of reinventing, yourself and as well as your organization. And static isn't going to work.
So that'll be
And
your
I
work.
think,
Like that's
yeah,
that's your sort of the thread that will continue. Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah.
and I think that's what my passion is, right? That's where this podcast came about. And I think where we've been able to stand apart from other stuff is really getting to understand people's emotional quotient, right? Is really understanding. I mean, I can't tell you how many times we ask a question, they're like, no one's ever asked me that, or I've never thought about that. And I think that's part of it is we've gotten so used to being in a box
Yeah.
and thinking that everything we do has to look a certain way because it traditionally has.
That's right.
And so I think that's the really cool part about what you get to do is a lot of your coaching, same as how Jamie and I work with our clients, right? A lot of the stuff we do starts with who are you as a person, right? The good old Simon Sinek, what's your why?
Yeah.
And
exactly.
so, I mean, I know that I've gotten there, and I know Jamie's gotten there as well with clients where like, this is even something you're going to be good at because you don't even like people, right? Or you don't like hospitality, or
Yeah.
how can you expect someone to want to work in an office when you refuse to go into an office? I mean, there are just so many ways, and it's the same way as you're experiencing, I'm sure, too, in the boardroom.
Yeah. And it comes back to things that are like, you can't fake it in that fundamental sense, right?
Yeah.
It's actually okay if you, and it's a couple things on that front. One is a lot of leaders have a hard time saying, I don't know, those three words, right? I mean, I
So
got
do
trained.
Enneagram 3s, Brian.
Oh my God. Yeah. It's me in a nutshell in so many ways. I also got trained as a consultant in my 20s, right?
Totally. You must know.
Yeah,
You must
yeah.
have all the answers. Yeah.
Exactly. Seldom wrong, never in doubt was the phrase. It got like burned into my forehead, right? Just like, don't do it. And that did not serve me well when I got into operating jobs, right? Because then you're the smart ass know-it-all. And your team's like, well, I can just keep my brain off because he's going to tell me what to do. And I may have learned that one the hard way also. And I'm not that I'm great at it these days, but at least I'm aware of it. And this is also the thing, right? You don't change your nature, but if you're aware of it, you can do more filtering. I can put a sign up here that says WAIT, why am I talking?
No.
Yeah.
That's a good one.
And I think in my experience, that's such a big part is when you can teach people self-awareness
Yeah.
of why they do things, why they do have certain patterns, why they view some of these things. And I think that's part of it is as we continue to see the evolution in the enterprises, we continue to see the evolution of, even brokers, right? The way brokers are leading their clients and really getting them to understand why the dynamics are what they are and getting them, back to, the last 5 years have been huge in getting the service providers to even realize that the future is flex to some extent, right? And so getting them to to bring on new members to the team that look at it in different ways is such a big part of it. And I think just, again, it goes back to being self-aware of why we look at things the way the lens that we look at it, like Jamie said.
Yeah. Yeah. I think that's spot on. And you touched on something earlier too, Gio, which is like people that don't want to manage people. That's one of our other classic problems, right? If the only way up in your organization is by managing people, if there's not an expert track, then you're sort of asking for it from a leadership perspective. I'm a huge fan of wherever you can do it, create an expert track, because there are people who are amazing architects who they should be an architect for their entire lives, right? Because they are so good at it. And they will not only do great work, but they will actually show other people how to do great work. But they may not be the world's greatest manager, and they don't want to be. So why do you force them into that when what they really want is they just want the advancement in their career and the compensation that goes with being amazingly great from an expert perspective?
So you started talking about your sons earlier, and sounds like I missed that part of the conversation, which is awesome. So I get to hear it, but clearly you've got two children that have chosen different tracks for different reasons. Yeah. And I always find that so interesting how siblings can grow up in the same home and just be so completely different.
Also completely from their parents.
Yeah, for sure. So if you were to take each of your sons and ask them what they loved about you most, what would it be?
Oh my God, that is a good question. Way to go. Love, support. They know that me and Maureen, my wife, both just love them to death and are here to support them and do what we can to help them out, but also watch them find their own way, right? And it's been really amazing watching them. So my two young sons are 23 and 25 now. The older one went and worked for the Treasury Department in DC for a couple of years, while a lot of his peers went into higher paying private sector jobs. He did his 80-hour weeks. Most people make fun of the feds these days as not working hard enough. This was an intense job. And now he's getting a law degree because he wants to, chase down bad guys who are moving money in inappropriate ways. Younger one has been a baseball fan and all his life and a stats geek, but also a writer. He got an undergrad degree in English with a stats minor that turned his love of baseball into a profession. So we were talking earlier, like Moneyball, the Jonah Hill character, is what Riley's doing. He's working for the Toronto Blue Jays. Just started down in Tampa, Florida at their player development complex. So
that's amazing.
Yeah,
totally.
Very cool. Very different things that they both want to do. Very different, people, but also really wonderful kids, adults.
So what kind of conversations do you have with them about work? And I mean, it's such a different landscape, right? That they're starting out in than, what our generation did and even pre-2020. Do you guys, I don't know. Do you guys sort of talk about that, or what do you observe or see that's interesting about what they're experiencing?
I have two Gen Z kids who are part of the reason why every time somebody trots out the kids don't want to work hard these days thing.
Yeah.
I'm not buying it. I'm not buying it just on the basis of them. Like, the problem with that phrase is it's been said about every freaking generation. So I've got a slide I use that has like quotes going back to newspapers in the US in the 1880s.
Oh, that's funny. Yeah.
It's basically like the younger generation is a bunch of slackers, and I'm Gen X. We were literally called slackers. That was the term for us when we were coming into the workforce. And like there's some truth to it, which is they're more purpose driven. And the financial side isn't as big of a deal for them in some ways. That's because the financial rewards honestly aren't as good, right? Look at millennials and Gen Z both. Cost to them to buy a home versus what it was for me, it's like 4x from a salary perspective, right? And so you look at things like that and you're like, the trade-off's just not the same for work hard, put your nose to the grindstone, get rewards that it was even 20 years ago. So we shouldn't be surprised that stuff doesn't entice them. I actually love the fact that they're more purpose-driven. If you're good at building purpose-driven work, that can work really well and get people aligned and motivated. The thing they do with me, though, is every time I start going off on this, I wrote an article and sent it to them and said, hey, what do you guys think? And it was on, Gen Z and differences. And one of them writes back, I shall consult with the Gen Z Council and get back to you on this, Father. So they may have also gotten my sarcasm and my wife's.
I'm letting Jamie, I'm letting you ask business questions. I can keep
I
going
just
on the
asked a good
personal front.
personal question. I just
Oh.
asked him what, so, but I'm curious, like, do you worry about their experience in a less office focused, like on one hand, you're very
Yeah.
sort of like choice oriented. And yet I think my biggest like I remember being like straight out of business school. Like, what would that have been
Yeah.
like if I wasn't going to an office? Like, so different.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I,
I mean,
I-
tell me
well,
your
I
thoughts
said,
about.
backing up half a step, most people think that like, if you just read my stuff on LinkedIn, half the time the response I get is, "Oh, you're the pro remote guy." I'm like, "Oh my God." I'm actually not. Most people don't want to be fully remote, and
Yeah.
fully remote's not the right answer for most people, and definitely not the right answer for most teams, especially if you don't set it up right. It's hard. If your firm is born remote, you can do it, and I've seen people do it really well. It's actually not what I would want either, to be honest. So both of my kids have basically picked places where they've ended up being in person for most of it. Like the older one, when he was at Treasury, was 5 days a week.
Yeah.
There were good reasons for it, given what he was dealing with and some of the information he was handling and things like that. The younger one would be there with players doing work, but then would go back and do analysis, wherever it was most convenient. Often when he was doing a summer job here in the Bay Area on the couch downstairs, right? Because that was just easier. And he was doing it until 1 o'clock in the morning. So there is an aspect to this that goes back to like social development, socialization, mentorship, and learning type of opportunities that younger people actually, again, dispelling the myths, they're the least likely to want either extreme. They're the least likely to want to be full-time in the office. They're the least likely to want to be fully remote. They want something in the middle, right? They want to do it for a slightly different mix of reasons. So figuring out how you make that happen is part of the art form around this. But the other thing that I do remind people of is like the coaching and mentorship you do for a long time has happened through technology as much as it has in person. And it's much more important with that junior salesperson that after the call with the client, you have the conversation with them where you talk about what did they hear? What feedback do you have for them? How could they improve? And you can do that with a phone call. You can do that on a Zoom. You can do that in an office. And given the fact that most of your customers probably aren't wanting you coming to visit their office in the first place,
Yeah.
it's not like it was 30 years ago,
Yeah.
Chief.
Right.
You gotta also adapt to how are you going to coach those people and use the tools you've got to give them the feedback they need.
So I'm going to play off of something you asked earlier and could get me in trouble, but I get over it real fast.
Oh.
So you made a comment about people that look like you tend to make different decisions than people that don't, right? So in your experience, is it that people, whether it be ethnic in leadership or gender or anything else, like, do you see decisions being made based off of some of those experiences and who they are and everything else?
Yes, and I have data to back it up. So it's often gender, and it's actually as much about caregiving as not caregiving, and also your literally your levels of difference from people that are underneath you. So we did this a couple of years ago with Futureform data. We pulled executives on a regular basis, and we would cut it a bunch of different ways. But one of the questions we asked is, what concerns do you have about providing more flexibility to your workforce? And if you were over 50, productivity was number one, collaboration was number two, culture, blah, 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 blah. And down at the bottom was inequitable treatment of people. If you're under 40, inequitable treatment of people was number one. By the way, that group was actually more diverse in the first place. The gender balance was closer, right? Because they were more junior executives more often. And so the challenge is if you don't have a voice in the room that's going, hey, boss, you do know that this is going to impact people's childcare situations, right? That they're going to have to get coverage for the commute 5 days a week when we shift from 2 days to 5.
Right.
If nobody in the room is telling them that, if nobody's sitting there going,
It's not their reality. They don't think
not
about
their
it.
reality.
Yeah.
Exactly. They don't live it.
Yep.
They don't live it. They don't think about it. The places where this comes to play are all over the place. And so I'll do storytelling off of that too. That is the most basic one is it comes down to people with multiple responsibilities who, by the way, are equally as ambitious women in all these situations, like Lean In did a great study on this a couple of years ago, are just as ambitious as men when it comes to desire to advance. They just need the playing field to be on the basis of what results you create as opposed to hustle culture. And the challenge
And if
is,
they're in charge of the freaking getting the kids to school every day and then getting them at school at 3 o'clock and all those things, then that's not equal. Yep.
yeah, exactly. And that's
And they
what's
can't live out their ambitions as easily as,
Yep. And that's where it shows up the most. There are also race and ethnic differences too. Like we found it early on in the Future Forum work. Like the first study we put out showed that, think back to summer of 2020, get our first round of results back, and sense of belonging with your team dropped, which everybody sort of expected, right? Because you're gone from the office and being together all the time to everybody's, sequestered at home and locked in. But then we cut it by race. And it went down for white employees. It went flat or up for every other group. It went up for Black employees. It went up for Hispanic employees. What in the world is going on? And it's not that it was better. Like literally the lines look like this. Like white employees went down and Black employees went up a little bit. And Brian Lowry from Stanford, who's a professor there, said, "Hey, look, I'll tell you why. I'm a Black professor on Stanford's campus. 5 days a week on campus, 9 to 5, I have to watch how I walk, how I talk, what my appearance is like. And that's taxing. It's hard. It's code switching, but it's also just stressful. If I can plug into that environment, then plug back out of it, I get a break. So yeah, my sense of belonging gets better because I'm able to engage, disengage. And it's not that they don't want to be in the office. It's that they just appreciate the ability to come and go from that environment. And I had no clue that was the case to that extent. So, I think that's why I say like it is people like me. It's, it's not your lived experience. And if it's not your lived experience, someone has to be brave enough to tell you this is what's going on.
Well, and I think you made a really good point right there. I think part of it, someone has to be brave enough to ask the questions that could potentially step on toes or upset people, right? And so I think, as an Enneagram 8, that's where we get to challenge things and ask questions. And part of it is just realizing that part of our personality is that there are people Jamie knows it. There's people that are never going to like me just because I am who I am.
Yeah.
Right. Because I do challenge things and I have to stick to being who I am and honor my journey. But at the same time, know that I've surrounded myself with enough people like Jamie and Kurt and Faye and people in the industry that I know are going to stick up for me and be like, you don't really know his heart, so you can't really say that. Yeah. Right. And so that's where I commend you for going into these boardrooms and having these difficult conversations, right? Of writing the difficult articles, doing the things that others are going to push back on, right? Because it's people like you that really drive the change. It's people like Jamie that get to talk to her clients and be like, oh, you're not going to be good at this, or those numbers aren't right, or anything else. And I think, what I love about what we get to do is to continue to have these conversations, to continue to push against the status quo, because that's what's going to change things.
It's not easy for people, right? It's not easy for people to give me feedback. I know it. And so I've just been lucky enough that some people have been daring enough to do it. Like early in my career, one of the things I talk about is in my startup days, Mariah was my chief people officer of the firm. And she came to me one day and said, "You're kind of an asshole." She was right.
Water cooler talk.
Yeah, exactly. She wasn't holding back at that point because she watched enough and was frustrated enough too, right? That she's like, this is not going to work out well if you keep going that way. And then other people over the years have had to, take me aside and share things that I initially was I was resistant around, but that's hard. And I do think it's harder these days too, because I think the cultural tide is all of a sudden going from being very, human-centered leadership is great to, what do you mean human-centered leadership? Get back to work.
Yeah. Well, and I think you make a good point there too, is it takes people that care about us enough to speak into those situations. And that's, me going back to Jamie's love of the Enneagram. Literally that took some situations that we were in that I saw happen time and time again. And we really were not that close at the time. And I was like, Jamie, can I give you some feedback? And she was like, a 3 doesn't like feedback, right? That's its
No.
image and
You
everything
made me
else.
take
I
the
tell people I
test, just
love
read the
feedback.
book, and
Yeah,
Exactly.
that's how I grow. So I sent her the book and everything. And I was like, look, you're dealing with someone that is an unhealthy 8. So an unhealthy 8, we're battering rams. You can go against
yeah.
us all day long. If you're not healthy and willing to look in the mirror and go, hey, I'm an asshole, like you just said, it doesn't matter who comes and says it to us or how many people we may cry or how many people we upset. We're just never going to see it because we think it's their problem and not us. Right.
Exactly.
And so
Exactly.
I think that's part of where we are as a society overall. Right. Is can we have the difficult conversations where it doesn't mean we have to agree, but I tell people all the time, I grow by having conversations with people I don't agree with.
Yeah.
Right. Regardless of it's personal or professional. And so people are like, you just like arguing. No, I just like having conversations that help me grow. I'm not trying to change anyone's opinion. I'm just trying to understand where their position is so that I can go, okay, when I interact with this person, regardless of, profession, race, gender, anything else, is I'm going, okay, well, how we put ourselves in their shoes. How do they view this? Right. And, and I think that's such a big part of being good humans, period.
Yeah.
But being able to be good leaders, like we get the opportunity and the platform to do.
And if you surround yourself with all, of one type, you're also not going to ever get the challengers. You're never going to get the people who are the harder edged ones or the people who want to be more aggressive and more achievement oriented, right? Because you're going to get yes people, and that's going to eventually, bite you unless you're in some oligopolist situation, which a few of our big leaders are. If you found your wife into a near monopoly that prints money, congratulations. You can poorly manage for a long period of time and you will do just fine. The rest of us, however, probably need to be a little better than that.
Yeah.
Okay.
So we didn't touch, I know Jamie's looking at time. One last question for me, and then you can go.
Okay, then I have my wrap-up question.
So, you briefly touched on your wife, and she went through Booth too. So kind of what is it about her that allows for you to do what you get to do from a support system and everything else?
Oh my God, I screwed that up early on. So part of it
You're
is
confessing to a lot of mistakes. This is very vulnerable of you, Brian.
yeah. Well,
Yeah.
this is a newer me and a more recent me over the last
Okay.
few years, mind you. I mean, early on in my startup days, we were both dual career, right? And one of those like if we'd known then what we know now, we probably at least would have had a richer conversation. Maybe things would have gone the same way. But there were trade-offs we made between work and careers and the kids and life that, in retrospect, I wasn't very smart about either. And so we've gotten smarter about that over the years. Now we're at a place where it's a heck of a lot easier to have these conversations. We both do various forms of advising. She's actually an amazingly great executive coach. I'm more of an advisor type. And we each have our own clients and do our own work and just make space. But we also have, at this point, the luxury of flexibility on a bunch of dimensions. So we can, each do stuff and then go off and go off in different cities. It's pretty good.
Jamie, it's all you.
Okay, my wrap-up question. Okay, you mentioned you typically don't like to perform, but you do kind of like karaoke. So you're out with some friends. What's your karaoke song?
Drag somebody up to do Bohemian Rhapsody, and they can choose if they want to be high or low, and I'll take the other side of it.
Oh, okay. I like it.
Wow, he was
Yeah.
ready
Good
for
to
that
know.
one.
Totally.
As soon as she said karaoke, I was like, I'm pretty sure I know where she's going with this one. And everybody's got something they can do from a go-to perspective. And that one, it's easy. It's fun. It always gets the crowd going too. So
Okay, I like it. Okay, we are officially out of time. I think we schedule for 45 minutes in case we get someone boring. So we are technically over. So thank you for hanging out with us
no
for
worries.
an extra 15 minutes. I feel like I could go on all day. I have more questions for you, so we might have to do this again sometime.
Love
But
it.
Gio, I'm glad you picked Brian off of LinkedIn and asked him to do the podcast. And Brian, thanks for oh, I'm getting an echo. Yeah, thanks for sharing your story and for doing what you do and for being willing to chat and being open-minded to connecting with us.
You got it, Jamie. Great seeing you again. And Gio, thanks for reaching out.
Of course.
Chat with you both soon.